Hey everyone, welcome to This World, the one program you need to watch to be fully informed about all the major events around the world and what they mean. I'm Vikram Chandra and you're watching WION World is One. Before we dive deep into this week's biggest stories, let's take a quick trip around the world on what's happening. The World Economic Forum began in Davos earlier this week. The theme for the 53rd annual meeting is cooperation in a fragmented world. And boy, do we have a fragmented world right now. So far, the meeting has featured addresses by global influencers and multiple heads of state and governments, including Ukraine's President Zelensky.
Happened near Kyiv.
In Asia, the week began with anger around a deadly plane crash in Nepal. More than 70 people died after a Yeti airline plane flying from Kathmandu to Pokhara crashed while approaching the runway. There was also an air crash in Ukraine. A chopper went down near a kindergarten outside the capital city of Kiev. At least 18 people died. Among them was Ukraine's interior minister.
Unfortunately, it's just another horrible day for Ukraine. From the outside, it may seem that we must be used to it by now. But unfortunately, we are not. And this is just another tragedy.
China too was in the news this week. The country's population declined for the first time in more than 60 years. China ended 2022 with 1.411 billion people, as opposed to 1.412 billion a year earlier.
Economically, the number of productive people continues to decline, which will reduce our national competitiveness. In terms of national security, I am worried that there will be a big hole as the number of people who can serve in the military continues to decrease.
It's Chinese President Xi Jinping who seems to be the most worried, and that's because a demographic decline stands to cost China a lot of its dreams that are based on low labor costs. And by the way, that also means that India could become the highest and the most populated country fairly soon. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern resigned, citing burnout. The 42-year-old said she no longer has enough in the tank to do the job.
I know there will be much discussion in the aftermath of this decision as to what the so-called real reason was. I can tell you that what I'm sharing today is it. The only interesting angle that you will find is that after going on 6 years of some big challenges, I am human.
Ardern became the youngest female head of state when she was elected to office in 2017 at the age of 37. New Zealand will elect its next Prime Minister in October. The Taliban amused the world by revealing the prototype of what it's calling Afghanistan's first indigenous supercar. Mada 9 has been built using the engine of a Toyota Corolla. Okay, you're up to date with the week's big headlines. Now to some of the most impactful and most important stories this week, and what impacts us more than a war. The war in Ukraine is no exception. Soon it will be a year old. Some 7,000 civilians alone have died since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. More than 11,000 people have been injured, and these are civilians alone. What about the soldiers? Well, the United States estimates that at least 200,000 soldiers have died on both sides. Yes, 200,000, that's a huge number. And you know, whether we like it or not, it's not just what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia. This war has affected us all. You don't need to have to be related to the soldiers who died or the civilians who died. You don't need to be in Ukraine or have family in Ukraine to feel the pinch of this war. Just look at your wallets or your mobile banking app and you will see the toll of this war. It has cost us all by burning a hole in our pockets. And that's just one part of the story. The war has led to an energy crisis. It has catalyzed the impending recession across the world, contributing to a slowdown in the global economy. It's contributed to job losses. And we are seeing the impact of all of these, and we're going to be touching upon all of these issues on this program tonight. And we begin with the latest. Germany has refused to promise German-made tanks to Ukraine. We're talking about these tanks, the Leopard 2. These are supposed to be Germany's best-in-class war machines. But German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is not feeling too generous. Scholz says Germany is not saying a no to sending the Leopards to Ukraine, but he wants the United States to send American tanks to Ukraine first. These ones, the M1 Abrams. Why is this news? One, because you have two of NATO's most prominent members playing rock, paper, scissors over sending tanks to Ukraine. And guess who stands to lose out? Yes, Ukraine.
We are really looking forward to aid. I am grateful to all the countries who support us. Do not hesitate. There is no need to compare. If you say, I will give tanks if someone else also gives tanks, or I am powerful in Europe, but I will help if someone else outside of Europe also helps. It seems to me that it's not a very correct strategy.
Reason number two, Germany has a unique voting power. Since it's the original maker of the Leopard, Germany gets to decide whether the countries it has exported the tanks to get to re-export them. Poland has these tanks, so does Finland. Spain has 200 Leopard 2 tanks, and Ukraine needs all of these tanks. Its President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Ukraine needs at least 300 Western tanks to win the war. 300 is a big number. So who's actually sending so many tanks? Earlier this week, the Spanish foreign minister said that the question of sending tanks to Ukraine is, quote, not on the table, unquote. Britain, on the other hand, has announced it will be sending Challenger 2 battle tanks, at least 14 of them. 14 is a long distance away from 300. France, too, is considering sending its Leclerc tanks. Now, here's something you need to keep a close eye on. Defense ministers of the Ukraine contact group will be meeting at a U.S. Ramstein air base in Germany. This is where it's located on the map. Now, who all are part of the Ukraine contact group? NATO members and some other countries. What are they going to be discussing? NATO's General Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, has said the discussion will be around delivering, quote, more advanced support, heavier weapons, and more modern weapons, unquote. But how much and how many? Zelensky's weapon wish list has only been growing. Not too long ago, Ukraine's president wanted the West to give Ukraine an air defense system. Now he wants 300 Western tanks to win the war.
The war in Ukraine began in February 2022. In the months that followed, at least 30 countries provided military aid to Kyiv. The United States of America leads the long list of donors, with commitments worth $18.51 billion. Germany is next. It has sent and promised military aid worth $2.34 billion. The other top donors are the United Kingdom, Poland, Canada, France, Czech Republic, Sweden, Estonia, and Italy. So, who's sent what? In December 2022, the US made global headlines by announcing export of the Patriot missile system to Ukraine. This missile system has a range of up to 100 kilometers. Then there is the NASAMS, or the National Surface-to-Air Missile System, again provided by the United States. Australia and Canada have sent M777 howitzers to Ukraine. This weapon has a range of 40 kilometers. Ukraine currently has over 100 of these M777 howitzers. Poland and Czech Republic have sent at least 230 tanks. These are NLAW next-generation light anti-tank weapon. They are lightweight and they have been crucial in stopping the advance of the Russian army. These weapons came in handy during the early days of the war, when the Russian troops were marching towards Kyiv. UK has sent over 5,000 of these anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. Not only have countries donated weapons to Ukraine, many have also sent crucial weapons wrapped in bills. Take Turkey, for example. The country sold Bayraktar TB2 armed drones to Ukraine. These drones have been effective in attacking Russian targets, including helicopters, naval vessels, and missile systems. The list is long, but not enough for Ukraine's appetite. President Volodymyr Zelensky's weapon wish list is ever expanding. After asking for air defense systems, Zelensky now wants the West to send tanks. But is the West in the position to play Santa and fill Zelensky's Christmas stockings?
And to discuss this and a lot more, I'm now being joined by Solomia Bobrovska, who's a member of Ukrainian Parliament. She's also on the Committee for National Security. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. Just wanted to get your sense on how the war is going and how important these tanks are.
So I would say that war is still in a very tough period and has very tough line, especially on the east, but still east and even southern part. I mean Bakhmut, Soledar, which is in Donetsk region, which is in the east of Ukraine, but still we are observing and we see how Russian army is moving, mobilizing, and still they are getting prepared for the second wave of mobilizing. We see what they are doing in Republic of Belarus, and unfortunately we are expecting new wave of this war and new invasion from Belarus side at the end of February, beginning of March. I would say war is still, even despite we have the weather below zero, especially in the east, remains to be a very tough. And why actually we are calling again and again for the hard weaponry. We all understand Russia is not ready to negotiate in any sense, and it means they are not ready to withdraw their Russian troops. We are still calling to the international law that they have to withdraw their troops to Ukrainian-Russian borders. And it means that result of this war will be shown only on the battlefield.
So on the battlefield, if that's what you're saying, where it's going to be, I know Ukraine has been asking for these tanks, right? And the Germans seem to be saying, let the Americans send tanks first, and the Americans are saying, we're not sure we can send tanks. Do you think you're going to be getting these tanks at all, or no? And do you have a contingency plan as to what you will do if you don't get tanks?
Well, first of all, we're not just thinking, we are almost sure that we will get all the tanks, not only from Germany, but from France, from Poland, from US. We will see these tanks. And just now started the 8th meeting in Ramstein. That means the whole all group Ukrainian friends gathering to finally make the resolution or conclusion what kind of weaponry we will be given to support now against Russian forces. So I just have no doubt that we will get the tanks. Unfortunately, we see so many discussions within the German politicians, and we still do not understand. They are so close affiliation and so close feelings to Russian Federation. They see what's going on and what's happening, and they are warning about that as well. Understanding that they have to increase even their military capabilities, producing as well. And I hope, and their Minister of Defense yesterday in the very late evening announced that they can give tanks even without the decision of U.S. decision. And still, we see U.S. position, they are ready to give us tanks. And just I think after today's meeting in Ramstein, we'll be on the other line of discussion, and finally we'll see that weaponry in Ukraine on the battlefield.
Right. Solomia Bobrovska, member of the Ukrainian Parliament, member of the Committee on National Security and Defense. Thank you so much for joining us and saying very clearly there's no choice but to fight and to keep fighting, and you need all the help that you can get. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, some rather strong views from Ukraine there. Well, let's just go across to Russia now and see what the Russian perspective in all of this is. We are now being joined by Mark Sleboda, who's international relations and security analyst there in Russia, joining us live from Moscow. Mark, welcome to you, Mark. Just wanted to understand, Western leaders are sitting and they're discussing this entire question of arming Ukraine, sending those trunks. How do you see this playing out? Obviously, Russia is warning the West against sending more weapons to Ukraine.
Yes, there is a great deal of panic and desperation among the Western states that are of NATO that are waging a proxy war against Russia, because the Kiev regime, which they helped seize power in the country in 2014, has lost two armies in the last year. The first army that they started out with was the second largest army in Europe. It was built up, we now know from Macron and from Merkel, over the course of 8 years with NATO funding, training, and it consisted of some 2,500 tanks, some 13,000 infantry fighting vehicles and APCs, thousands of artillery pieces, dozens of fighter aircraft. That army is no more. It does not exist. The second army was sent from NATO countries and consisted of Soviet legacy equipment from the former Warsaw Pact and Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and consisted of some 500 more tanks, hundreds more of infantry fighting vehicles. And it was peppered with MiGs, with dozens of modern NATO artillery systems, such as the HIMARS and the M777s. And that army also no longer exists. It was expended quite wastefully during the Kherson and Kharkov offenses, when the Russian forces, fighting a war of attrition instead of a war of tactical maneuver, simply retreated and continued to pound the oncoming Kiev regime forces across the open steppes of Kherson with its artillery and air advantage, causing enormous casualties. Now, as Russia has mobilized and gathered a strike force, yet uncommitted to the theater, of some 500,000 troops fully equipped, the West is panicking, and they're scrambling to escalate, to send whatever they possibly can drag, even out of their own armies. They've exhausted all of their stockpiles.
Assuming NATO's showing no signs of wanting to directly get into a fight with Russia, not so far attenuated.
That is not, I cannot agree with that perspective at all either. NATO is already providing C4 ISR. It has hundreds, it has admitted in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times that they have hundreds of CIA operatives, special forces, directing Ukrainian forces on the battlefield. The United Kingdom was involved in the planning, equipping, and escalation of drone attacks on the Crimean Bridge and the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. The only thing that is separating NATO from a direct war on Russia is Kiev regime proxies pushing the button that they literally put in front of their faces. NATO is in a direct war with Russia at this moment.
All right. Just looking ahead now, what is the way out of this? Other than, I mean, I'm sure that Russia would say Ukraine should just surrender and give up completely. Assuming that's not on the table from the Ukrainian side, at some point, do you think this leads to discussion, to dialogue, to some sort of a peaceful exit from this? Or are we going to see this war continuing all through 2023?
This war will likely continue for several more years.
Several more years, you're saying?
Several more years, yes, absolutely. I don't see that there's any room for diplomacy with a West, which completely puppets their putsch regime in Kiev, that has betrayed agreements of two forms of the Minsk Accords that were solidified in a UN Security Council resolution. And we have heard from both French and German leaders that it was all a deception, pulling something over Putin's eyes, making him believe that there was a peaceful reconciliation to the Ukrainian civil conflict. There's no partner with to conduct diplomacy that can be trusted. I mean, all conflicts end at the end with diplomacy. But the only way that this can bring a permanent peace to Ukraine and Russia is if the regime in Kiev is completely defeated and removed, and NATO is driven completely out of the country and suffers a humiliating defeat.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst from Russia. Thank you so much for talking to us from Moscow. Thanks so much. And I think just hearing both those voices really shows why Mark is probably correct. This war may well continue for months, if not years. It's not easy to say the way out, because you were just hearing from the Ukrainian side saying Russia needs to be defeated. It needs to be defeated by weapons and on the battlefield. That's the only way they'll negotiate. We've just heard the Russian side, well, Russian analysts saying that's exactly what has to happen. The reverse has to happen. Kiev must be defeated, the regime must be thrown out, and Ukraine must be defeated. So this fighting, by the sound of it, could well continue for a while. So if you go by those statements, it seems clear that the war in Ukraine not ending anytime soon. And that's one of the reasons why the war and the impact of the war was probably one of the biggest talking points at Davos this year, when all the big global leaders and CEOs all gathered in Switzerland, as they always do at this time of the year. You see, what's happening in Ukraine is perhaps the biggest war in Europe since World War II. It has resulted in a series of repercussions, starting with sanctions. It's impacted the global economy in more ways than we actually realize. Supply chains have been affected. Food prices have touched a sky high. Energy has become more expensive. Countries have tightened their monetary policies. The combination of all of this, along with COVID, has resulted in fears of a recession, and a recession that could really devastate the global economy this year in 2023. Now, what's a recession? It is a period of economic decline, and it typically lasts 2 quarters or more. Earlier this week, at Davos, the World Economic Forum released a survey of its chief economists, and that survey said a majority of chief economists believed a global recession is likely in 2023. Of them, at least 18% believe that the prospect is not just likely, but highly likely. Now, I wouldn't take that prediction lightly, because the consequences are something that is going to be affecting all of us. And if you ask me, this is not entirely on unexpected lines. Remember, the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, expects around a third of the global economy to enter recession in 2023. Will India be among this one-third? Well, perhaps not. IMF's Geeta Gopinath believes that India will be a bright spot. Many other people feeling that way as well. Gopinath told a gathering in Davos that India is in a good place, adding many countries are looking at India as an investment destination at this point, especially as they try to diversify out of other countries, including China. So in this case, India is an exception. Who knows, if China continues to look really grim, then India may even be a beneficiary of all this economic crisis. But for the world, the macro picture is pretty grim right now. The IMF has, for example, cut global GDP for the year to 2.7%. And no surprises there. You see, a prolonged period of instability is bound to take a toll on the global economy. Do you remember what the Collins English Dictionary's word of the year for 2022 was? Perma-crisis, which means an extended period of instability and insecurity. So, I think what I'm trying to say is we all need to learn to adjust to this all through the year. And we are going to be looking a little bit as to how it's going to affect all of us. Don't take too much, don't relax too much saying, well, India itself is okay, that's fine if you're in India, but whatever's happening in the rest of the world is going to affect us. So some of the important questions: how long is this period going to last? How long will the recession last? How bad is it going to be? Also, what does the recession mean specifically for you? Could mean that your earnings take a hit. Could mean your salary goes down. It could mean that you have a job loss. With the market suffering losses, your investment portfolio too may well take a hit. So what should you do? This may be one time where you would welcome a little bit of gyan, so I'm going to try and give some to you. Lesson number 1, of course, is try not losing your job right now. May be difficult, but try not losing your job. And that is something I'm going to be talking about a little later in this program. But other than that, number 1, try paying off the debt that you have, especially high interest debt. I'll tell you why. Because as banks raise their rates, your credit card interest could go up too, your housing loan interest could go up too. So that's number one. Number two, save up for an emergency. God forbid you are laid off. You need to ensure you have enough to sustain yourself and your family for a couple of months. And number three, focus on budgeting. Now you may say, too late to tell me to save, I haven't been saving all this time, but you can still budget. Make sure that at a time like this, you're not spending unnecessarily. This is not the time to go and bust a lot of money on things that are luxuries or that you could hold off for a period of time. This could be a bad time. It could be a bad year. So be a little careful right now. A bear market is very different from a bull market. And in any case, a lot of the stuff that you're busting up in some of your essentials as well could well end up costing a lot more. Starting with fuel, energy, already burning a hole in our pockets. In India, for example, petrol costs more than 100 rupees or $1.23 in 3 out of 4 metros, 106 rupees in Kolkata, 106 plus in Mumbai, 102 or so in Chennai. These are not the prices that you should normally have. The fact that the prices are here is partly because of that war in Ukraine and partly because we are living in unprecedented times and are fighting unprecedented battles and a number of crises at the same time. Now, what do all of these crises mean for us? This has been a major subject of discussion at Davos. So I am going to get a sense of what the impact is on the global economy with two very special guests joining us from Davos. Boj Brende, who's the president of the World Economic Forum, the person who's organized all of Davos, and also Joe Kaiser, the chairman of the supervisory board of Siemens Energy. Gentlemen, welcome to Beyond World is One. This is This World. My first question is to you. We've read the findings of the chief economist survey, and we understand the direction it's pointing at, and it's not a pleasant direction. I still wanted to ask you, what do you personally feel? Do you think a recession is coming up in 2023?
So we really now need to avoid that we end up like in the 70s. Then we had a decade of low growth, high inflation, high debt, and high unemployment. With now making sure that we get control of the inflation, later on can start to reduce interest rates and also continue to trade and invest. There will be no recovery if we don't have a trade and investment recovery. A further fragmentation of the global economy, that is like really, really a toxic cocktail that we should not make and we definitely should not drink.
Oh, okay, Joe, let me just zoom into the energy sector. With everything else that's happening, war, energy, being trapped in the war, all of this stuff, would I be right in saying that energy is perhaps the biggest crisis right now? It was certainly one of the major subjects of discussion there at Davos. Energy, that crisis, the number one crisis the world is battling.
Energy crisis is crisis for many economies, but not for all. If you look for the United States, it's a big opportunity. If you look at the Middle East, it's a big opportunity. So, there is crisis, but there is also opportunities, and we need to bring those two together.
Would you also say that in a host of the crises that seem to be facing us right now, energy, that's one of the things that would be worrying you?
So without energy, no development. The energy prices that have been soaring has also led to inflation. It has also led to stagnation in industry production and unpredictability. I think we are now seeing that this is more under control than it was just a few months ago. We are seeing that the energy and gas prices are going down in Europe. We see a lot of renewables being injected into the global energy mix. That's also good for climate. So hopefully we will be able to deal with this triangle in the energy picture, like energy access, decoupling from CO2, and then energy security.
Okay, Joe, we've just been getting some sense of what's happening in Ukraine a little earlier in the program, and I'm sure the audience wants to know. What do you think, looking ahead at the rest of the year, is the cost of energy in general, and perhaps in Europe in particular, going to continue to go up courtesy of the war?
Well, look, as a global player in so many industries, we are not too worried about regional inflation or recession in some economies. The world still offers a lot of opportunities. just talk about India. It's full of opportunities. The Prime Minister, in the meantime, looks for improving the infrastructure. So all the industry will look to India, what they can do. So there's a lot of countries and economies which provide a vast opportunity.
All right, I'd like to thank both of you so much for joining us from Davos, from the World Economic Forum at Davos, where those subjects have been discussed.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure, thank you. Bye.
Okay, so these crisis times could continue for a while. Now, a little earlier in this program, I was telling you one of the things that you should be careful about is job loss. Don't lose your job. Unfortunately, one of the biggest signs of recession are job cuts or job losses. During the Great Recession in 1929, for example, employment shot up and more than doubled in the US alone. It tripled in other places. And why just job loss? Many people, even if they kept their jobs, had to take pay cuts, big pay cuts, because the employers simply could not afford to keep them on and pay them what they were paying them. What's happening now is not too different. On the 18th of January, Microsoft said it's laying off as many as 10,000 workers. That's around 5% of its total workforce. Microsoft, remember, one of the strongest companies on this planet right now. Also, on the 18th of January, Amazon announced that it was beginning its largest ever layoffs. The plan is to fire at least 18,000 people. Amazon has, of course, routinely been cutting jobs for a year now, but these are a pretty big round. Now, the question is that if some of the strongest and the biggest companies in the world are doing this, you can expect this to go elsewhere. It will certainly be massive in places like startups or other companies as well. Now, the latest round of job cuts, for example, are going to be at Amazon are going to be targeting employees, for example, working in the retail division or human resources. Many Amazon employees said that they saw this coming because it explains some somewhat bizarre instances of Amazon HRs, for example, publicly marking themselves #open to work. These employees perhaps preparing for a plan B. They were, I guess, what you would call career cushioning, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the right thing to be doing in public forums at a time like this. But the overall question is very simple. What really happens to job security at a time like this? You know, we are so used to cribbing and complaining and saying what's happening to our increments, what's happening to our salary hikes. But what happens when some of the world's biggest companies start to fire employees? Take Twitter, okay, perhaps it's no longer considered in the same league anymore as an Amazon or a Microsoft, courtesy Elon Musk's takeover of the company and everything else that has followed. But I'm talking about Twitter because earlier this week, reports said that the social media company too is planning further layoffs. Just how many people is Twitter going to lay off? They sacked 50% of their staff. Now they're firing more people. So the obvious question is, why is all of this happening? Why are people working in some of the richest companies losing their jobs? So let me try and explain this to you in the simplest way possible. Number one, revenue growth is slower than expected. So companies are being forced to downsize. The staff you can sustain when you're growing very fast is not the same as the staff you can sustain when the economy starts to shrink. Number two, let's not forget that in the last couple of years, these tech companies had been on a hiring spree. The pandemic had increased people's reliance on tech. The NASDAQ was at an all-time high. Demand was shooting up. Profit was shooting up. Music was playing. Hiring was going on. Microsoft, for example, increased its workforce by 36% in the last 2 fiscal years. Between June 2020 and June 22, its employee strength went from around 163,000 to 221,000. The company now says that the layoffs are a response to, quote, changing customer priorities, unquote. Not really untrue. Some analysts do believe that most tech companies today can easily afford to let go 10 to 15% of their workforce, and that is why these companies are downsizing. Some would say that the right word is right sizing, because when the music is playing and that fantastic bull market is on, a lot of excess happens. A lot of excess people are taken off. When the music stops and recession approaches or bad times come, that's when the impact is actually felt.
I think that many companies are right-sizing their staff for what's likely to be a more incrementally challenging period in demand. from the macroeconomy versus the last 2 years. And I think a lot of companies are using this as an opportunity to get more efficient and to align their cost structure with their revenue base.
So as you see, all of this is part of the ripple effect. When there's a lot more money in the economy, when things are good, people spend more, businesses earn more, they're making more money, they're profitable, so they hire more, they pay more, they give better pay hikes. When the economy shrinks or recession comes, all of this is reversed. Lesson for you, even if you do get a pay hike this year, it is not going to perhaps be at par with inflation. It's not going to be what you expect. Probably hold on to it and saying, okay, it could be a lot worse. At least I have a job. Now, there are some reports that are coming in that it might not be quite as bad in India as it is in other parts of the world, but we'll have to see just what that is. It's going to be 9% or 30% or 5%, so not quite clear. All right, what should you do then? Be careful. Don't slack off right now. All this quiet quitting, not necessarily a sensible idea in a market like this, because there are 5 people eyeing your job probably at a time like this. So don't slack off. Do remember that nobody in the job market is entirely irreplaceable, so it's always wiser and safer to be among the top performers. Be reliable, be trustworthy, be responsible. Also, if you already have a job where you're valued and you're thinking of making a switch, now may not be the best time. You're going to hear me underlining this for you just as advice and gyan. You don't have to listen to my advice if you don't want to, but frankly, having seen these recession years in the past, this is not the right time. If you're thinking of transitioning into a new field, setting up a startup, this may not be the right time. A recession is not the best time for career experiments. And let's talk about all of this a little bit more with Sunil Chemakote, who's the CEO of Team Lease Digital, live from Bengaluru. Sunil, we've been hearing about all this job loss happening in Silicon Valley, but what's the picture here in India, Silicon Valley? We are also hearing about layoffs, many startups cutting jobs, Swiggy being only the latest. What exactly is happening here? Is the situation as bad here as it is in the American Silicon Valley?
Yes, definitely there is some amount of layoff happening in India as well. Obviously, it was expected to cascade down to India. With the tech layoff happening in US, we could see some amount of impact in India because most of these organizations are global organizations and they have a large operations in India. Keeping the tech aside, tech, as you all know, last year, they went ahead and hired in huge numbers, anticipating a, tailwind. However, it turned out to be a headwind. And that led to these corrections. They had to take up these corrections to be relevant in the business and to bring back the profitability of the companies. Having said that, in India, we also have seen layoffs in the startup ecosystem. Last year, when we had huge funds flowing into India, I think all the startup companies were focusing more on GMV, gross merchandise value, and increasing their sales, which resulted in hiring huge numbers. However, as you all know, the funding winter has just set in, and you don't have enough funds flowing into the market, and that has led to some amount of correction. And unfortunately, it's the people who are getting impacted.
Right, this almost always happens. You have the highs and you have the lows. You have the bull market where all sorts of things are done. And then when the cycle turns, you really end up with a lot of problems. And we've been seeing in some of the startups, questions being asked. We just heard the latest, what happened with Go Mechanic. If you're an employee right now, if you're in a job, what should you be thinking about? Should you be worrying about the increments, which we believe are actually coming? Should you be just worrying about holding on to your job and making sure you're not on some layoff list?
See, the first and foremost is to be practical and not be emotional when you're working for any organization. In today's scenario, we don't see a long-term association, and it's more of a taxi cab relationship. So, if there is a situation where organizations have to tighten their belts, they look at, cutting down a lot of cost, and unfortunately, employee cost is one. From the employee perspective, what is important is that employee should be relevant in the industry or in the company where he's working. He needs to consistently upskill himself. and he should pick up projects which are futuristic and which add value to the organization. And they should actually ask themselves a question when they are being asked to pick up some new project: is it worth moving to those new projects, or should they continue where they are? All in all, I would say that holding on to the job is very important, and it's important to create a good perception about your capabilities, not just being good, but you should also be perceived as a good employee.
All right. Sunil, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, one of the other things that happen as you transition into a recession or you go from a bull market to a bear market is some of the claims that were made in really good times start to come under a lot more scrutiny in the bad times. So look, in this episode's final segment, I do want to begin by showing you a short video. The video was of a Tesla car, the self-driving Model X to be specific, and in the video, the car appears to be driving itself. In 2016, the Tesla CEO Elon Musk posted this video on his Twitter handle. Tesla drives itself, he bragged. Not just that, Musk added that the car also parks itself and returns to pick up the passenger when summoned. Like a genie, summon it and it's there. What Musk was selling was a story straight out of the future. It was a story that he wanted Tesla owners to believe, and many of them did believe it. But in hindsight, it turns out that this story was nothing more than a fantasy, at least a fantasy so far. That car in that video never actually drove itself. The whole thing was to some extent staged, and the world only found out about it 6 years too late. How, you ask? Well, you see, there was a fatal Tesla crash involving an Apple engineer in 2018. I mean, it was one of the many crashes that had happened involving a Tesla. Okay, I know Tesla says that a lot of cars have crashes. Why does everyone only pick on Teslas? Valid point, but yes, there were many crashes involving Teslas. But I digress. The Apple engineer was driving a Model 3. The car was on a Silicon Valley freeway when it went and hit a concrete barrier. The engineer was rushed to the hospital, but when he died, it is believed that during the time of the crash, the car was on autopilot. An investigation began, and recently, the legal proceedings involved a deposition by Tesla's director of autopilot software. His name is Ashok Eluswamy, and he said that that video which Tesla released in 2016 was actually staged. Unlike what the video showed, Tesla neither had traffic light handling capability, nor was it capable of dynamic route planning. Why then did Tesla, lying is a strong word, but why did Tesla put out a video that maybe not entirely what the truth is? Eluswamy said it was Musk's idea because the video was made at Musk's request. But at what cost? According to one estimate, there were 272 crashes involving driverless Teslas alone between July 2021 and June 2022 in the US alone. In the past, Tesla's driverless cars have hit many things, from trees to road dividers, even a plane, would you believe it? And on Thanksgiving Day last year, a Tesla Model S triggered an 8-vehicle crash in California. The car was traveling at a speed of 55 miles per hour when it shifted lanes and braked abruptly. This led to a vehicle hitting the Tesla and triggered a chain of reactions of crashes. Look at this video. And as recently as earlier this week, a Tesla Model 3 crashed into a ferry terminal in Canada. Now look, I just want to make one thing clear. Let's not only pick on Tesla. The flip side, which is fair, look at the number of crashes that happen. Look at the number of crashes that happen because of human drivers. Look at the number of crashes that happen because of other cars. Tesla says, and Elon Musk says, and they may have a point, Tesla gets unfair criticism. They are picked on a lot too much. Why aren't you talking about all the other cars that are also there, as having accidents? Valid point, completely valid point. But in a sense, Tesla has been the poster car, the poster child of the entire self-driving revolution. So it is only fair, I guess, that Tesla attracts a lot of the criticism. But is there a question mark overall about driverless cars? Is this technology that was hyped too much, too soon? And for more on all of this, now being joined by Ashish, a host of Pit Stop. Ashish, self-driving cars. A lot of hype around it, like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's going to come right now. It's happening tomorrow. It's happening day after. Actually, AI might come before that. Too much hype, and are we being unfair in singling out Tesla for contributing to that?
So a couple of things to unpack over here. I think we are not being unfair. I think Tesla deserves the criticism that we have been talking about. And autonomous driving capabilities are way far out. It's going to take at least 20 years for us to adopt the technology at a mass scale. And yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
And you're talking around the world. India autonomous driving, I don't know when it's going to come. Next century, we'll have to fix a whole lot of things.
It is going to be a nightmare, yes.
Driving by humans is next to impossible. I don't know what AI. But you're saying even in the US, in California, autonomous driving is some distance away.
So California is fairly advanced. That is the only state which is doing some good stuff in the driverless technology and implementation of the technology as well. But if you look at Utah or any of these cities and towns and states, it is going to be a little difficult for the technology to get completely tested in a big way. So yeah, even US is kind of fragmented in that way. All the technology is focused around very specific pockets.
So that ad that we were seeing from Tesla that we were criticizing a fair amount, fair criticism, you think that it was too early to make some of those claims that it is happening?
Absolutely. And we have to look at how things unfolded, because in the whole of 2016, Tesla essentially tested their autopilot system for about 800 kilometers, because before that they were on the Mobileye system. They just started doing their own autonomous evaluations, and it did not go down very well, because if you look at the data and compare it to the other players in the industry, they've had the maximum disengagements. And by that, what we mean is Tesla, in the 4 days of filming this ad, and also then the days that it essentially drove the car for this eventual execution, they had a total number of about 180 or 182 disengagements for the total.
Which means that the human has to take
Yes,
over.
so the human or the driver in the driving seat, he had to take over the control system. Okay. So there was a disengagement of the system.
The self-driving cars are not coming in the next week.
Not at all.
Next year.
Not at all.
Maybe not in the next decade.
Not at all.
All right, Ashish, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure talking to you. And that's all we have for you this week on This World. We'll be back again next week. The big newsmakers, the big events taking place around the world, all of them discussed and analyzed from an Indian perspective. Bye for now.